NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Want to be more thorough while also working faster? It doesn't matter if you're on the red or blue team, an augmented reality overlay can enable you to be more thorough and faster at the same time. No glasses, no goggles. Polarity delivers this superpower as an overlay on top of your existing workflow and tools. The free Community Edition connects to the data you care about to overlay the context you need to make informed decisions. Apply for early access today at securityweekly.com/polarity. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Join the Security Weekly community. We've got a mailing list where we announce webcast and virtual trainings. Receive your personal invite to our Discord server by joining that list. You can join the Discord server and subscribe to all of our shows by going to securityweekly.com/subscribe. We are, in fact, ramping up our webcast and technical training schedule for the rest of 2020. You will learn how to reduce the blast radius of your cloud infrastructure coming up next on securityweekly.com/webcasts. Visit securityweekly.com/on-demand to view the previously recorded ones. We did one today with Secure Circle. It went very, very well. Great questions from the audience. Thank you, everyone, for that. Alrighty. Now we've got about 52 stories to cover this week.
So let's go for it. 60 seconds or less. Let's go.
Buckle up. We've got a lot of fun stuff for you. Where does everyone want to start this evening?
How about your number 10?
Number 10, 3 cybersecurity lessons from a 1970s KGB keylogger. This was one of the more interesting articles that I've read actually in some time. So a quote from the article just to set the stage. It turns out that what very well may have been the first keylogger was built by the Soviet Union and used on an IBM Selectric typewriter in the U.S. Embassy that was in Russia, the Soviet Union back then in the 70s. What the NSA learned back then can still apply to cybersecurity today. Now, kind of, and you should definitely go read the article, and we'll talk about the various aspects of it. But I found one really annoying thing, but very funny. So the NSA removed about 11 tons of equipment from the U.S. Embassy in Russia, and about 10 tons were shipped covertly. Now, the Russians had shut down the elevator in the embassy for preventative maintenance. And remember, this is a time during the Cold War where both sides would do anything to annoy one another. So most of the gear was moved through the building by stairs. 11 tons of typewriters by stairs. Oh. That had to suck.
I think it was typewriters and other equipment.
And other equipment, too.
Yeah, but still 11 tons.
But it wasn't until 1984 that someone had analyzed the X-ray, someone at the NSA had analyzed the X-ray and gone, there is an electronic device that was collecting the keystrokes, essentially, on the typewriter and sending those over a radio frequency in bursts that was very difficult to detect with equipment at the time. Arguably, one could say equipment at this time as well, for doing that. So, Jeff, I sent this article to you earlier as it's clearly in your wheelhouse, and you can only share with us with, what's not top secret classified, or classified in any manner, I should say, right?
Well, it was a fun stroll down memory lane. Let's just say that. You may recall, our listeners may recall, that there are times when we're talking about certain technologies and advances and new ways of exfiltrating data and capturing data with, blinky lights and this, that, and the other. And sometimes I don't pitch in a whole lot to the conversation. And the primary reason is, we may or may not have done stuff like that in the past, and I don't know if it's declassified or not. So I at least liked in this article, I can talk about what is spoken about in the article because it's clearly been declassified. So this keylogger in question, very familiar with, was I started at NSA in 1986, and part of my indoctrination included a whole lot of orientation classes, let's say, and at least one of them, we reviewed stuff like, here's what the adversary, the Soviet Union, is doing to us, and they would, there was all sorts of stuff that was passed around. I think most of it is now in the Cryptologic Museum. So we, but this bar, I don't know if anybody remembers an IBM Selectric typewriter. The picture of the one in the article, I had that in college. The same color.
Right. It was a picture of it.
See, and I thought that's what you were going to say about memory lane was the IBM Selectric.
But this was an electric typewriter.
No, I mean, it was an amazing piece of equipment.
Right? Well, for those that don't even know what a typewriter is necessarily, but this was the one that had the ball rather than the individual keys that would hit the paper. This was the ball that kind of rolled in a certain. I don't pretend
not
to know
only
how it
did
works,
it have. Not only did it have the ball, and it was a very the older style typewriters were kind of like a piano. You hit a key, and there was this little bar that had the it was little it was lead, or I guess that had the letter embossed on it. Would go up and a ribbon would pop up, and it would hit the ribbon, and the ribbon had an ink on it, and it would leave an impression on the paper. This worked much the same way, only the ribbon was more plasticky, so it was a much crisper letter. But the ball would spin around as fast as you can type. The ball spinning around to the right spot because all the letters are on. It's like a geodesic dome. And if you wanted to change fonts, you just pulled the ball out and dropped in another ball. That's how you changed fonts and changed font size.
Yeah. Oh, you mean you didn't like highlight and change the? No.
The other one too, Jeff. If you think about the original typewriters, they were manual. So you had to press down on a key as opposed to the IBM Selectric. It was like typing more on a modern keyboard where it was a very light touch-ish.
It was an amazing light touch because, my mom had a iron, I think it was literally iron typewriter that was manual, and I used to like to bang on the keys and get the things to stick. And the fun was, can I get them all stuck in one blob? I hopefully more than one person than me had that idea.
You did. Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Me too.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, and the IBM Selectric typewriter, even before I went to NSA, I had government jobs where that was like everybody had an IBM Selectric typewriter. The ribbons in a conventional typewriter were on reels, and it would spin one way, and you could just flip it, and then it would spin through, and so you could keep using it forever. On the IBMs, it was like a one-use thing. So there was this little plastic tape that was, hundreds of feet long, and you hit the letter, and it would, remove the ink and put it on the paper. So somebody had the brilliant idea of, if you can steal those, you can just peel it off, and it's all the words and letters in reverse order.
Right.
So, one of the security procedures, even prior to NSA, was at night you had to pull those ribbons out of the. I think it was at NSA. You had to pull the ribbons out of the typewriter, lock them in the safe because it had essentially classified information potentially in reverse. But the best thing about the IBM Selectric was, and this is foreign to people on a computer keyboard, is if you made a mistake in the old days, you had to use this stuff called whiteout.
I remember whiteout.
And there's all sorts of jokes about, the blonde secretaries that would, smear up their computer screens because there's whiteout all over the computer screen, right? But they had an additional tape of eraser. It was just white ink that you could backspace and hit a key that meant you were going to erase something, and then you'd hit the key that was the bad letter, and it would just print white on it and instantly make it disappear. Yes, Lee?
I seem to remember it had a buffer of an entire line. You could just keep backspacing it and delete it.
Oh, that was further.
That was
that
later
was
on.
That was the newer one?
later on. That was when they got into word processing.
But now the Russians though weren't into stealing the tapes, right? Because there was procedures to safeguard them, right?
On a typewriter, there's a rubber rolling wheel, and that you put the paper in, and you'd spin either side, and it would feed the paper in. You have to line it up. You type. You hit a carriage return, which on a computer keyboard is called the Enter key, but on a typewriter keyboard, it's a carriage return, and it would flip it to the next line. So it would roll it to the next line. And to hold the paper against the rubber wheel, there was this bar that would run across, and it had little wheels on it so that the paper would slide. Through, you would lift it up, feed the paper, lift it down to have it grip it, and away you go typing.
I didn't use a typewriter very often.
In that little bar is where they had built. They basically, handcrafted and hand engineered and hand machined a metal bar that had all sorts of cool electronic technology.
Right. Battery powered electronics, from what I read, right? Yeah.
It was amazing technology. And that was one of the first things that I was introduced to, back in '86 when I started, was here's all the cool things that the Soviet Union is doing against us. Not going to talk about what we might have done, but that's what we were encountering. And they would put devices, listening devices, we call them bugs, and they'd be all over the place, especially in embassies.
But the typewriter one stayed there for at least
the typewriter
14 years,
one,
right?
was there for quite a while before somebody discovered it. So yeah, it was cool because like I was reading the article, I'm like, yeah, I remember this. I know exactly what it is. And then I'm reading the article like, yep, that's what it was. And then I got to the picture. Yep, that's what it looked like.
That's really cool. But and I think it was you, Jeff, that said like it was hackers that put this together. Like Russian hackers basically devised. I mean, this was very much a hacker thing to think about how you would bug a typewriter in this way, and an ingenious hack because it went undetected for 14 years, and so ingenious that I think they said in the article the FBI tried to analyze what data might have been exfiltrated, and they couldn't. They came to no conclusions. How do you figure that out?
No way to tell. But it was amazing. And I mean, we had when it was presented to me, it was presented with not, oh my gosh, look what these guys are doing to us. It was like, with amazing respect. Right. Look at the technology that these guys are using. Look at the craftsmanship, because they had to match size and weight and the dimensions of this thing and make it look like the real thing. Similar to in modern times, not to bring a PCI element into it too early, but card skimmers that are most commonly showing up on fuel pumps, or at ATM machines. So you make something that makes it look like it's legitimate and real, and it's got all sorts of capturing technology built into it. It's along those lines. Only it's not a layover. They replaced a part with something that was the exact size and dimensions. So that was their. Okay, we have to make it look exactly like this and weigh this much and make it work. Amazing technology, 70s technology.
Well, what's amazing is like this was happening in the 70s, and they obviously were able to intercept the supply chain. You think about what that looks like today, and what has happened and could be happening today with the technology that we have. Getting in the supply chain is not just making a part for a typewriter, right? I mean, it could be in software, it could be in hardware, and even more difficult to detect today, potentially.
So funny you should mention that, and I'll go out on a limb a little bit and say that when I was there in the mid to late 80s, much as a result of this discovery and for other reasons, the U.S. had contracted to build a new embassy. I'm not sure exactly what the year was, but in Moscow there was going to be a U.S. embassy built, and they built it with Russian contractors. Which intuitively you might think is maybe not a bad idea, but the attitude, and I remember it being presented to us in that time frame as well. We thought, or the people that were doing the contracting thought, Well, we're so good. We're the U.S. that we know that the Russians are going to put bugs in the building, but our technology is so much better. We'll just detect it and we'll be immune to it. So who cares? Let them do it. That didn't exactly work out that way.
Right.
So there was a time when there was a lo and behold, the embassy's getting completed, and they would go in to sweeps of the building to see if there's bugs, and the thing lit up like a Christmas tree. So they had this super secret program where people, I didn't do it, but a lot of people that I knew got to go spend like a month in Russia, in Moscow, and their job was to go around with all the sweeping technology to try to find all the bugs that were in the concrete and that were in the bricks, that were in the cinder blocks, that were all throughout this building, and try to find them all. Very top secret operation. I hope it's declassified by now. But if not, if you don't see me next week, you'll know why. But people were loving it because they were getting extra pay for travel, extra pay for doing a super secret operation, and so on and so forth. So people were making bank. I wish I could have done it, but they went over there, because they had to clean up the building, because lo and behold, we didn't have the technology, as this article suggests. I mean, you can have great technology to detect this kind of stuff, but there's ways around everything. It's like Tom. It's evasion.
Yep, and Jeff, I think that brings to the quote, the three things that you can learn from this.
That was what I was most interested about when I looked at the article.
That third thing was don't trust your detection tools.
Yeah, absolutely.
I loved the first one. Even a low-level target like a typewriter thermostat may offer an easy way for an attacker to get information. Like, this is IoT.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
It really is, and that's why I bite my lips so often when we're talking about the IoT stuff, and all I will say is, if anybody's talking, they're emitting a sound wave which can make things vibrate, which is measurable. Yep. So just let your imagination.
Great segue
even those windows in that nice little man cave vibrating,
exactly.
Jeff.
My article number 23, how hackers can pick your locks just by listening. So it goes something like this. Now, they say from a few centimeters away. I would imagine if you had some more advanced microphones and audio gear, you could increase that distance, much like we talk about wireless hacking in any capacity, right? The person conducting the attack records the audio of the victim unlocking the door, so inserting the key into the lock. For these purposes, they say a smartphone would work just fine. However, other microphone equipment could also suffice, which makes me think you could also increase this distance, right? With proprietary software, the team removed the noise from the audio file, calculated the distance between each ridge in the key, known as the biting depth? Bit depth, right? But they also calculated not just the height, but the length, right? And they show a graphic of the kind of mathematical formula they used to determine as the key was inserted, the distance both in and out, and then also vertical as well, how far the pin was coming up. And they got it to a point where, based on the audio sample, they could produce 3 keys with a high degree of success of being able to unlock the lock.
Insane.
So it bring down your attempts from hundreds or potentially thousands, right, down to 3. That was pretty cool.
So let me tie the two together for you real quickly, and then I'll shut up and get off the NSA nostalgia. Similarly, if you think about the English language and the frequency of letters, and how often some letters are used, and how the tendency of words formation where vowels follow consonants, consonant follows vowels, and you look at a keyboard, which the computer keyboard is the same layout as a typewriter keyboard, thank God.
QWERTY keyboard, right? Unless you were Dvorak or something.
It's possible, hypothetically, to And I'll say, when you used an IBM Selectric, because it was electronic, it made noise. So clackety, 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 you could hear people typing. If potentially somehow you were able to capture that audio, it's potentially possible to measure the delays between the clackety, clackety sounds and predict what letters are being typed based on the time delays, based on the space of letters on the keyboard and the frequency of letters used in the English language.
Hooray, statistics.
Yep.
I mean, but we've covered attacks in the past where people have put listening devices on computer keyboards and tried to derive what was being typed. So, yeah.
Well, we did it first.
Yeah, there you go.
Good.
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically.
At least in the 80s. Hypothetically.
I guess it's a segue into Zerologon, right? And
it is now.
It is now. Speaking
it is
of,
if you want it to be.
Being able to predict, maybe having some plain text or ways to predict in some of the ways in which we're able to attack cryptographic algorithms. Zerologon was the other article that I read this week.
Which number, Paul?
I'm going to. I've got a couple 21. Of them in there. I'm a 13 and 21 are my two
13.
articles. I liked 13 better. This was actually an article from Naked Security at Sophos. Okay. But I tell you what,
we're at 13.
Whoever wrote this article has, and Tyler, you pointed this one out too, right? Like an in-depth knowledge of how Windows and both cryptography work. So whoever wrote this article is a total ninja to be able to explain it. And I got about 3/4 of the way through before I started getting really, really lost.
Now,
but the fact that I could understand it about up to that point is a testament to how well the article is written.
Now that said, I want to say that somebody at Microsoft said that all of the way NetLogon worked was public. And
it is based on a now open standard. It was not always open. It is today,
and
correct?
As part of that open standard, there was somebody at Microsoft went and said, hey, look, this is exactly how it works. And this is why this now happens.
Yeah. So I thought that the key, air quotes key, to understanding this attack is in this one line from the article, which actually pulls from, the NetLogon spec. And it states, if AES support is negotiated between the client and the server, the NetLogon credentials are computed using the AES 128 encryption algorithm in 8-bit CFB mode, and here's the important point, with a 0 initialization vector. There's a lot of other technical details. I mean, a lot of other technical details here, but that was essentially the crux of the issue with this vulnerability that was pulled directly from that NetLogon spec.
Which is probably the default setting, but go on.
Yes.
Essentially, Jeff,
so,
yes.
And for those uninitiated, you talk about an algorithm. We think about like MD5 and then HMAC MD5.
Yep.
MD5, you give it data, you get a result. You give it the same data on another system, you get the same result. It's always the same result for that same data.
One-way hash, not salted.
Right. With an HMAC variety, it is salted.
Yep.
So you have to have an input key to derive, and if you don't have that key, you won't get the same data, and so forth and so on. But in this case, that 0 input, that salt is always the same.
The salt is the same.
That's a great way is predictable.
Very, very. Bravo, Larry. Bravo. That's why I said this, because the other thing in this article was when I was reading, I'm like, this kind of sounds familiar. And then later on the article, it's like, yeah, this is very similar to the way WPA works. I'm like, yes, that's why it sounds familiar, because there are some. I mean, it's not exactly the same. That's what I'm saying. But
it is similar to how WPA2 pre-shared key and Enterprise do work, in that there's some input seed to a hashing algorithm. And ultimately, the article you said was something about crack.
Yes.
That key reinstallation attack for WPA, all of the varieties. And this is the part that bit BSD and Android, in that once you were done with the key in a legitimate session, they wiped the memory. And they populated the memory with all zeros. And key reinstallation attack says, hey, go back to memory, that place where you put the key, and then use the key that's in memory.
To make it a random.
Yeah, grab your random string that you used last time and put it back in memory, but it was
wiped.
It
had already been wiped.
It was wiped with all zeros. So you now known salt for crack.
That's two silos doing something really, really smart and and shooting each other in the foot.
Right?
Yes.
Yep. Smart, efficient. I'm curious. My article number 2, which is an AES finder in a way which had no content. It was just screenshots of some tool that somebody shared with me, and that's why I put it up. I wonder if it's related to this conversation.
It certainly could be. Could be. Yeah,
but I thought it was just like the way that AES keys are, when they're being used, they're held in memory, and it's just a matter of scraping the memory.
Right.
That was my impression.
This attack is different. Now, Tyler, you've done some. Just getting back to Zerologon, because we've only yet scratched the surface. We've really just talked about some of the details in the cryptographic attack, but this attack has very far-reaching effects, both from the attacker and the Active Directory perspective, because once, in Tyler, you could probably describe this differently, but like basically once I execute this attack, it breaks all Kerberos authentication in the domain, which is just fascinating. I mean, you should absolutely go read it and understand exactly how that works, right? But once you execute this attack, it can basically reset a password to a 0 length. In effect, that has changes that go downstream into Kerberos, which means no one, machine or user, can now authenticate via Kerberos. It was interesting that NTLM is different and doesn't do that, right? But you can break the domain, basically. So, like, don't go testing this attack out in production.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the big takeaways. So you had the cryptographic flaw, right, which correlates into a lot of other realms. Like you said, this is an open source protocol, but it's the way in which Microsoft has leveraged this via the NetLogon RPC connection. And as you're looking at a lot of the POC code, the way in which this is being operationalized or the exploit is now being used is against something like a domain controller or a server. Now, if you're leveraging a domain controller, the machine hash that is used to the secret that is used to decrypt communications in the domain between servers or users, or to authenticate to the domain controller, that's signed with a secret. And if you're zeroing out this secret, which you can do against a server, it doesn't have to be a domain controller, but if you happen to do it against a domain controller, that secret on that domain controller then can't decrypt authentication requests for the tickets that are coming in from other servers or users.
You're right.
Yeah, and that's where that kind of Kerberos and the ticket granting ticket stuff comes into play. You can't decrypt that. And NTLM is obviously, you've got a couple different things here to think about. You've got Kerberos tickets that are already issued.
Right.
So you've got this authentication and race condition to other domain controllers. So depending on which domain controller you're accessing, you may or may not totally break the domain.
Right.
Or if you happen to do it against a server, right, like getting that server to then re-authenticate then becomes very problematic. Now, the nice thing about RPC and kind of this vulnerability, the good news for the defensive team, is you can't just directly log in. You can't just reset the credentials to zeros and then log in, because what you're resetting is the computer, the domain computer account. With inside there, and the
it's not your user account. So that was part of my confusion, because it wasn't the user's password that was being zeroed out that may succumb to domain policies, right? It's their password is part of the secret, and that's different from your actual password that you're using to log in.
Exactly, and that, I mean, from a simple standpoint, yeah, that's the secret that then decrypts the ticket granting tickets from whatever server or domain controller that you're accessing. And so there's a couple methods now that they have that can use some password history or reset computer account password function that then can reset that back. But there's also some issues around where that's pulled from. It's something on the local machine. It's in the registry, and there's some limited permissions on the computer as far as what the computer account can actually access. And so this is still being very much exploited and operationalized, and there's some interesting functions that a lot of people are starting to look at kind of around, hey, what if we don't just reset the password? So the kind of RPC function call that's happening is just one function call that's available. Now, if you're able to utilize this exploit, there are other interesting function calls that you can do that leverage kind of that same thing. And one of those, one of the scenarios is obviously a DC sync. But there's things that you can recover out of the domain that don't have as long-lasting effects, like getting trusts or getting user groups. So things that are more operationally or OPSEC sound. And so I think we're going to see a whole bunch of kind of POCs start to come out that are less destructive because unless you're an attacker, I wouldn't go test this anywhere in prod.
Right. But even if you're an attacker, you're going to get caught because stuff's going to stop. Stuff's going to, but it's a bad scenario because it's not going to break everything. It's going to break some things. And as we all know, and many of us listening know that have experienced in IT in any capacity, the worst problem to have is it works sometimes or works in some cases, but not other cases. And that seems to me like the condition that this would create.
100%.
Right now, until we get to the point where we can have a more reliable exploit that doesn't have those impacts on the domain, Tyler, which I think is what you're referring to.
And then if you have IT people that aren't as well educated or are in the know on kind of what the side effects of some of these exploits that are happening are, you just have a domain that breaks, you just fix that domain controller.
Right.
Well, what if during that domain controller someone got a DC sync and now has a KRB TGT to create golden tickets for the next 10 years?
Yeah.
You got a pretty big ant problem, right?
Right. Yeah. I fixed the problem, but right before I fixed the problem, someone has basically another DC with the capability to do whatever they want in the domain. Right.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is this is probably equivalent to, I would say MSO 867 as far as a operationally sound and just scratching the surface of capability kind of vulnerability. So go patch for one. Obviously, Microsoft has a two-phased approach and has already patched this as part of the August 2020 release, but that is only phase one. There's some functionality and things that have to be permanently adapted as part of their phase 2 rollout, which will probably come at the beginning of Q1 2021, I believe.
Wow.
And so, I would definitely go patch now to prevent this. And then I would be looking at my logs to make sure if you have anything weird going on in AD, especially with domain controllers or server access, I'd be investigating that right away.
Joff, you're stroking your goatee going this is so awesome. Oh, Joff, you're muted. Sorry.
You're muted, Joff. I might jump in since he's muted.
Oh God, yeah. I was reading about the AES cipher block mode they were using, which actually kind of fascinates me, where they're using cipher feedback instead of cyclic redundancy. Not cyclic redundancy. Instead of counter mode, and it's kind of an interesting. Anyway, the article kind of buries you deep, and I was going into the crypto side of it.
Yeah, it goes good.
Why
deep
did
in
they
the
make
crypto.
those choices?
Yes.
Anyway,
Lee says because it's easy, right?
Well, a lot of it's for backwards compatibility too. And what they do say about the NetLogon spec is that there's a lot of things in there that talk about how to implement the spec and also be backwards compatible. So that was interesting.
So
that's been a common theme, unfortunately, with Microsoft that need to be backward compatible, and it's bit them a number of times.
Yeah,
it appears to be the same thing.
Jeff, sorry.
Yeah. Well, so I want to put on my Crippy hat for a minute because I don't often get to do that. I was, I kind of read through the article. I'm not saying I absorbed it all, and it is amazingly detailed and like you said, Paul, wow, very impressive. I was immediately kind of dubious when they referred to cryptographic attack, and I'm like, oh, okay, wait a minute, because very often what is dubbed a cryptographic attack technically isn't a cryptographic attack. But in this case, they are describing what I would say are cryptographic attacks, which is kind of cool. Cool in the sense of if you're a cryptographer.
Yeah, right. Not cool when attackers are taking control of people's domains.
So to try to paint it in a different light for the two other people that see the world like I do, I see two things. maybe three things. Or it reminds me a couple of different things. One, it sort of reminds me, at least part of the description reminds me simply of a collision attack using a one-way hash. The fact that you put in a different, plain text value and you get the same result, because they're talking about how if you know what the plain text is, even though you're doing different things, you're getting the same cipher.
Right.
Yeah, that's a problem. Not necessarily technically a cryptographic attack, because you can't always assume to know the underlying plain text unless you're like attacking the Enigma machine and every message starts with Heil Hitler.
I was just telling Johnny that. Johnny came in my office when I was reading this article, and he's like, dude, you look like your brain's going to explode. I'm like, it is from reading this article. Well, and that was the example that I used when I was,
Right. And I thought of that, and it's similar, but it's technically different, but we don't need to dwell on the details. The other thing that it reminded me of, just sort of, I think we're all kind of saying this, and the article is saying this, they summarized at some point, two important lessons. One, cryptography is hard to get right.
Yep.
And cryptographic blunders take years to spot, because if it's all gobbledygook at the end, you think you've done the job. What could possibly be wrong? That probably is, that's my career at NSA, at least as a cryptographer right there. What it reminded me of, though, is like in the early days of my pen testing days at NSA, where a lot of the security, surprisingly enough, revolved around password security and trying to crack passwords. And it was very popular back in those days, which was mostly on Unix platforms. Mostly, it wasn't even Solaris. It was we were still calling it Sun OS.
Sun OS,
lots of people would cleverly try to come up with random password generators, and they would start by using the random function that was built into Unix, which
isn't all that random.
Which isn't random. It looks random.
No, it wasn't.
But it's based on a premise, and I was trying to remember and Lee, maybe you can help me out. I want to say that the term is linear recursive sequence. Is that ringing a bell? Am I in the ballpark?
It was something like that.
But basically, it's a function which was essentially what was built into the random function, which produces this really, really long stream of random digits or characters. I think it was digits, but essentially it would lap. It was a function that would loop, and the designers of the Sun OS operating system thought, well, okay, it's huge, and at the time computing power was like, okay, nobody can effectively go after it, and what made it random was picking your spot in this big giant imaginary loop of random data. The problem was if you didn't invoke the random function properly, you were always starting at the same spot.
Right, well, you had to reset that, but there was features where you could randomize it, but most people they just would invoke the function, and it was always starting at the same place. I want to say that the seed, the salt, was the Unix time, which is what's the September 70 or whatever it was.
Oh yeah, the first date.
The epoch is what you think.
The epoch. And that was how you changed it. The default was whatever it was, September 1st, 1970, but you could change that to what's the next logical thing to do?
The current date.
Current time. Current date and current time.
Right,
yeah, there's nobody would possibly guess that or predict that, or when did you create this password? It was last Tuesday. Okay, I've only got so many possibilities. So that's what it was reminding me of. It's just it's people trying to not overthink, but try to be clever and think, we're doing some clever things in terms of creating random passwords. And what they always ended up doing was taking the possible set of how many passwords there could be. In those days, a Unix password was 8 characters max, so it was 8 to however many characters were possible, 8 to the power of however many characters, or is it the number of characters to the power of 8? I always get that mixed up.
Number of characters
2 to the 31st
to the power. So it's 40 characters, so it's 8 to the 40th. And they always let's be clever and let's alternate consonants and vowels. Well, you're putting limitations in that are predictable. Let's make it generate things that look like a word, sound like a word. Let's do it in 4-character chunks instead of an 8-character chunks. There was all sorts of things, and because I happen to work at NSA with lots and lots of cryptanalysts, we were breaking and cracking 100% of passwords randomly generated by countless attempts at doing random password generation, because people were like trying to be clever and thinking they were doing something really secret, and they weren't. And they would end up shooting themselves in the foot. And guess what? That's kind of like the story of cryptography over the last 100 years. Yeah. Most of it is not cryptographic attacks like, let's actually break this. It's figuring out the ways that they've made dumb mistakes, like the Enigma machine. Using the same text at the beginning of the message that was predictable, that introduced a cryptographic weakness that made it solvable. The fact that it was 3 rotors or 4 rotors and it was all random and they would put them in different places, but every time a character was generated, the first wheel would click forward 1 until it was exhausted, and then the second one would click once. People figured that out and figured out that was all part of the which was done by who? The Poles. The Poles. I learned recently that the Poles. Did we talk about that on air?
Yeah, there's a whole backstory, right? There's more people involved.
And it was really Alan broken Turing. First by the Polish cryptographers.
Yes.
Turing simply automated it.
Yes.
He's the bane of all of us people that hate technology. He automated it. Anyway. To me, the most pertinent part of this article is cryptography is hard to get right, and that's always been my concern as it's being done in the commercial world, because it's really, really hard to do by nation states, and the blunders are which are the cryptographic weaknesses that the people that solve it try to keep secret that they know it.
But Jeff, I'm really glad that you talked about some of the older Unix kind of based systems, because my story number 1 is something that is I'm just amazed as to, even in today's day and age, how much we carry forward many of those lessons, services, and protocols that were originally found on those Unix systems, Finger being one of them. And I don't know how new this is. I happened to see it come up on ExploitDB, and I thought it was pretty fascinating. I mean, it's literally giving Windows the finger. I guess more when people who are defending Windows systems, giving them the finger. Quite literally, and by this I mean port 79 used by the Finger protocol, which... Why is that binary still included in Windows today was my first question, because immediately I went to my Ubuntu 20.04.
Why was it put on Windows in the first place? That was a Unix command.
Right? That too. But I went to my Ubuntu 20.04 systems that are up to date, because I just updated it this morning, not because of security, but because, issues. And so I'm just going to update and reboot and hope that, and it did fix it. But in any case, the finger command wasn't there. And I'm like, wait a minute. Windows has the finger command, but latest versions of Ubuntu Linux don't. By default.
The question is, did you have to get the man page for Finger before you did that?
I didn't have to ban Finger.
So anyway. somebody should really explain what Finger is really quickly, because there's probably people that really actually don't know what the command does.
Oh, command. Okay, all right.
The command.
I'm glad you specified for a sec. Yeah, Tyler's got it.
Go ahead, Tyler.
Fingerus, Tyler.
Details on users logged in. I had to look up to make sure I didn't screw that up, but that was yes. On remote systems, though, to say what user details.
Finger remote hosts.
Yes, remote hosts.
Yeah,
but in the early days, it wasn't remote. It was just systems on the network.
Right.
I mean, it was an early networking command,
like pre-internet, right?
Well,
early internet, yeah.
Well, it was pre-internet, but networking, local, local area network. True story, which would be appropriate for this set of hosts, is when I was in the first office before we became the PIP, but we were starting to do the hacking, the ethical hacking. Our network every system on our domain was, and this was early security. Name your system something random so people can't figure out what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Our domain happened to be the names of the planets, and swear to God, one of our running gags in the office was, "Hey, who's fingering Uranus?" I'll shut up now.
I think most of us have worked at least one place.
Uranus at one point or another.
Have worked for a place where the systems were named after planets.
I
worked
at. I mean,
right, Joff. When you worked at university, there were systems named after planets, right?
Oh, hell yes.
When I worked at university, absolutely, that was true.
That must have been in a recommendation best practice
somewhere in a red book or something.
We had planets, we had naval vessels, we had stars,
Star Trek characters,
Shakespearean characters. Yeah. We had a lot of interesting host names,
which makes DNS brute forcing easy.
It was an OPSEC thing, though. It was the thought that, well, let's disguise. It's better than fw.domain.com.
Well, that was the C name.
Basically. And dns.domain.com. And so
okay, on. But back to fingering for a minute.
Yeah, let's get back to fingering.
Let's finger.
The thing about this, as I understood it when I perused the article, is you could get the finger daemon on Windows to actually write a file. It was my understanding. Now, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you can do that, it means you could deliver a payload.
So if you fingered enough, you could get it to drop a payload?
Yes. Exactly.
You can use it to download files, exfil running processes, and even in the article that I linked to, you can bypass firewall restrictions to reach servers using unrestricted ports like 80 and 443. Port proxy queries are then sent first to a local machine, and so they showed you how to basically use finger over ports 80 and 443.
Nothing like finger for good penetration.
It's like C2. It's like C2 with finger, but leveraging a similar technique like DNS beaconing, right? Where you're calling something locally that then goes out to the next server.
I think I broke Lee.
To then do C2.
I think I broke Lee.
I underestimated how much we would have fun with the finger analogy.
No, you didn't.
I don't think that's possible.
Well, you've got to remember that in those days, the internet was a loving and trusting place. Yes. And that
you could finger everyone on the internet.
We weren't fingering over the internet. We were fingering in our own little office.
Remember,
it was a networking utility.
It was a network finger on the internet. What it was doing, what its IP addresses, whose machine it was, what their phone number was.
Right. It was a direct. It was really like the first directory service.
So Lee, what you're saying is that you could call them after you fingered them.
Yeah.
You got Tyler on that one. It was just head in hands, like, oh, you went there.
What, am I not wrong? I mean, if you fingered them, you got their number.
You got to call them, right?
Right, you could give them a call.
You fingered first, and then you advanced to the handshake, right?
Well, there was a handshake that would have to happen before the finger because it was TCP.
It was TCP.
There was a handshake.
Because you know what? Honestly,
you don't finger on the first handshake.
The handshake was ICMP.
Yeah, Joff, make a suggestion, and please tell me it's move on.
Yeah, please get us off this topic.
Get us out of this hole, Joff.
Joff, get us off.
Give us a story, Joff.
All right, so let's look at this story. Oh wow!
Because I can't believe.
Let's go to my story number 3.
All right, so Paul's story number 3. Okay, CrimeOps, the operational art of cyber crime.
See, I was hoping Joff would pick one, but whatever.
Paul.
It's not Joff Security Weekly. It's Paul's.
This is a great article, though. It's one of my other favorites.
7 so amazingly successful using only stodgy top 10 InfoSec risks TTP. Wow. The answer is FIN7's sophisticated organization and management capabilities.
Right. And Joff, what amazed me about that, sorry, I'm just going to stop right there, is that elite groups that are like different levels of like what's elite, right? In this case, how much money they make. What the article by the Gruck is saying is that it's not so much their advanced technological capabilities, ability to write 0 days and have these, not even 0 days, but have advanced techniques that, we talked about, previously and talked about on previous shows. Their greatest strength was their management and organizational capabilities. They adopted agile processes, DevOps methodologies, team coordination, project management. The thing that got me was using Jira. They used Jira. Fin7 created an issue ticket for each victim. As the attack progressed through reconnaissance, infiltration, lateral traversal, and target exploitation, the issue was updated. Usernames, passwords, output from security tools, screenshots, videos, everything relevant to that was put in the Jira ticket. And it was their ability to manage process. That
sounds like
something like over $1 billion or some ridiculous.
Sounds like some good pen testers I know that do similar type of processes.
Right?
Wow.
So pen testers, you think we're the only ones doing that? You're not, right? This is a group that adopted off-the-shelf available tools and a process to manage the entire thing. They created front companies, got people to do work, and it was really their strength was not in the outstanding TTPs that they had and all these, advanced 0 days. It was the management process.
Jeff?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm just going to say I'm impressed because that's likely to have more success every single time than LEET 0 days, right? I mean, LEET 0 days are one thing, right? And it's kind of gives you one entry point, but to actually follow this through with a systematic, repeatable process where you can get results, that's actually huge. That's much better than just having LEET 0 days.
Well, what's interesting, Jeff, now you just finished the book by Kim Zetter.
I did.
One could say Stuxnet had some of the most elite attacks in 0 days that we've seen in nation-state attacks. The downfall was the way they managed the process. It leaked out. And it caused disruption,
right? Exactly. I think that's a combination, actually. In the early days, they managed the process.
Agreed.
They got aggressive and over-exuberant, and they lost track of managing the process, and that's why it leaked out.
Okay. Yep.
They got careless.
Smiling, not saying a lot.
They got careless.
Tyler was on the team. He knows.
I mean, really, they went YOLO, right? Like they had a time frame, and there were specific goals that had to be achieved, and if they didn't achieve those goals, then there was no point in the project at that point. So it was kind of an all or nothing. Like we got to do this, or it doesn't matter. That's kind of where it went.
I still think it's. I mean, having read the book, and I highly recommend everybody read this book. Countdown to 0 Day is a fantastic read, and it's worthwhile for every information security professional to pick up this book and read it. It illustrates what can be done when you're really, really after a target, right? It also illustrates what overexuberance will do for you when you go too far. But the entire goals, for the most part, were completed successfully.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the 800-pound gorilla of our whole industry, though, most of our industry is built on protecting what I would call the casual. We're not really going after you, but we happen to stumble upon a vulnerability that we can exploit.
Crime of opportunity as opposed to
crime of opportunity. Right. None of us, no one in this industry, and maybe that's a strong word, but I like to overgeneralize to piss people off. Nobody's really tackling, but what if somebody's really targeting us? What do we do to protect our own security? How do we protect us if somebody's really going after us? Because the reality is, if somebody wants to go after you, an organization, they're going to get to you if they're that dedicated and committed enough, because there's so many ways to do it. How do you prioritize, and how do you nation states struggle with it? That's why we succeed at the national security level and agencies like NSA and our counterparts. How do you protect against everything? You don't. It's not economically feasible. And so we kind of stick our heads in the sand and said, well, let's just keep this industry going and spew a lot of FUD and build an industry on that. Not that I'm jaded or anything.
Yeah, but it's also time to detection too, right? And we can go back to the first story we covered and go, it was 14 years before we figured out how they were able to put a listening device in a typewriter. 14 years is way too long. And you have to run under the assumption that...
Not compared to the last one, which was 37 years that you don't know about.
Right?
That's the big thing, Paul, right? Is that time to detection, time to mitigation, and cost to access. So yeah, they may have a way in, they will always get in, you can always find a way in, but if you spent 6 months doing that, $60,000 in infrastructure to do that, and you have 10 minutes of access that only yields a certain objective, then that may be a win for some places because they have a very specific goal and they need that little bit of info.
Great point.
But that also is a very limited and very limited scope and kind of damage that can be done within that time. So that time to detection, time to mitigation really plays a role in, you're going to get, you're going to get infected, you're going to have someone compromise you, but what is the outcome? What is the business risk? Where are your business assets, and how can you cover and mitigate and stop whatever the overall risk is to the business overall from a long-term and longevity and profitability standpoint versus, just a reputational damage standpoint.
But you bring up...
Wait a minute, Paul.
Jeff.
I'm going to override you before you're the boss. I agree with what Tyler's saying, but I think there's also a layer that goes over top of all that. That's all legitimate, but there's also this idea of perception. We think we're secure. We think we're safe. We think we've done enough. Nobody's going to fault us if we get whacked, breached, whatever, because, they did the reasonable things. Case in point, I think I've said this before on the show, we recently remembered 9/11. I can't believe it's been almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. But, shortly after 9/11, it became very common practice to go through much more scrutiny at airport security. It used to be you could walk in all the way to the airport, and if you were sending your grandma to visit, Auntie May, you could walk them all the way to the runway and all the way to the gate, and that all ended. And then I forget what the time was, but there was the guy that tried to put the bomb in his shoe, and that's why we all have to take our shoes off. And I swear to God, I remember I was at BWI, Baltimore Washington International.
Oh, we know it very well, Jeff.
Mm-hmm. I was in there one time shortly after 9/11, going somewhere, and the Maryland National Guard was there, and so there's armed guards with M16s walking around, and one of the guys had a grenade launcher mounted on his M16, and I'm like, what the fuck are you gonna do with
in
that?
An airport?
In the airport, and of course, you find out later on that they were walking around with the guns, but they weren't even allowed to have the ammunition.
Yeah, it was just it was literally theater at that point.
Yep. Turns out that guy was just looking for the bra bomber. Sorry.
We've all traveled enough to know that not to disparage TSA, but I have inadvertently gotten many things through security that I technically shouldn't have gotten through, and I'm sure we've all experienced that. But that I tell people a lot, it's not so much security, but it's the illusion of security. You somehow feel better, that perception that, wow, they're really on top of things because they're making us take our shoes and our belts off. It's the process that goes behind are they really secure because they just let me get through with a pocket knife? They didn't see that. Or, God forbid, I've got the nail clipper with the little, knife thing on it.
I had a screwdriver once.
Or the classic Bruce Schneier story about bringing more than 4 ounces of liquid, and that you can bring a medical liquid. So he brought contact solution in like a 16-ounce bottle, and he brought 2 of them. So he had 32 ounces of liquid that the TSA agents didn't check to see what's actually inside of it. And when queried, they said, "Why 2 bottles?" And his response was, 2 eyes. Okay.
Right.
Yep. Sorry, Paul.
So all that to say is, I think a lot of this industry is built on not risk-based, but perception-based. Do we feel good about ourselves? Can we sleep at night because either we've done the right thing, or we think we've done the right thing, or it looks like we've done the right thing?
I think, there's a time in most of our careers when we could feel pretty good about security before we kind of understand the philosophy that I think Tyler, just kind of laid out, right? And there was certainly a time where, I was working in a place and there was two of us, and we were very heavy on looking at all the packets. I mean, we had snore IDSs everywhere. We had proxies everywhere. We were looking at the logs. We were looking at most of the packets, like going through that environment, and we felt really good. And the executives, came to us at the time and was like, well, I could hire my friend who's this pen test firm. I believe it was at stake at the time. And they're like, they could find a way in. And like, we really didn't want to believe them. We knew what they were saying was true. But we also knew that at some point we would detect them. And I think what we reached as a maturity model for a security professional is what you were talking about, right? Is that we make it so expensive and difficult, or as expensive as possible and difficult as possible for an attacker to get in, but also balance that with the time to detect. We know that, someone might get in, but eventually we're going to find them. And hopefully it's not years, it's not weeks, it's not months. Hopefully, maybe it's days, maybe it's hours, right, is what we're shooting for, is that we can find them once they get in. And I think that when you look at security for an organization, you have to realize that you're always vulnerable. But to balance the risk, Jeff, to kind of your point, is you make it really expensive for attackers, both time and money, to get in and reduce that time to detection. And that's our goals. And if there's solutions that help us get there, that's great, right? But it's all about process. It's all about the right solutions. It's all about enabling not just the security team, but others in the organization that I think really help you get there.
But you're underscoring a principle of security that I learned in my DoD days, which is, and is slightly different. It's not make it as expensive as possible. It's make it more expensive than the
next guy
perceived value of the payday.
Yeah.
Agreed. Make
Jeff.
It more expensive than. I mean, we would literally evaluate the security of crypto systems that we were designing based on the perceived. Back in those days, it was the GDP. Now it would be the GNP of nation states. Are they going to really spend 10% of their GDP to try to break this one system, and what would the return be? So that's absolutely a principle. That's a classic principle that I don't think has translated well into the commercial world.
It's Joff. It's like zombies. I don't need to be able to outrun a zombie. I just need to be able to outrun you. Yeah,
but don't forget, the zombies that you're outrunning, if you take Russia as an example, you can look at their GDP. Is that accurate? What if Russia funded FIN7, has that extra $1 billion of revenue to spend? That's one of the things that I think has changed.
That's a lot of zombies.
Right? It's a lot of zombies.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so now I just need to be able to outrun 1 billion of you.
You say zombies, but I learned it as outrunning a bear. You don't need to outrun the bear; you need to outrun your friend.
Right, but now you got to outrun 1 billion bears.
Right. Well, it's not. There's enough bears for every person that you're in your group, and then some, and that's a whole.
The bears are well funded beyond what you may know. Is kind of the point.
The other consideration, though, that people don't take into effect with groups like FIN7 is objective. Objective and target really do matter as far as, hey, you may be a small $5 million a year company that has very exclusive rights to some proprietary IP that maybe goes on like some government military thing. So at that point, you are now a direct target, and you only have to, if you're not outrunning the other maybe 3 vendors that are within inside that space, and there's not that many of you, then that's a kind of a different threat model and something that has to be considered.
Yeah, but that requires a threat assessment. But the threat in that context is not what they're doing to you; it's who is coming after you. What's their motivation? What are they willing to invest in you? I learned threats are the bad guys. We talk about threats as being what I used to call the attacks or the methods, which probably only matters to me. But I see a difference.
No, that's an important point. But I transition to another story. I did want to talk about the U.S. House passed an IoT cybersecurity bill.
Yeah.
I had to actually go read this because I had an idea of how this works in the U.S. and admittedly it was grade school, right? But when we studied, many of us
assumption junction. What's your function?
Like how how a bill becomes law.
I love that.
Because you could read this headline and go, oh wow, like if they passed the bill, that means it's no, it doesn't mean it's law. Right, because there's a lot of committees that need to happen, right? Representatives sponsor a bill, the bill's assigned to a committee, it goes before the House. Once it's passed by the House, it's studied by a committee, it goes to the Senate, and then it's studied by a committee, and then it goes to the president, and ultimately becomes the president has 10 days actually. And I linked to this because it gives the 218 out of the 435 in the House to have a majority, 51 out of the 100 in the Senate, and the president then has 10 days. And that's important as we look at a lot of these things that are cybersecurity related that we're looking at becoming law. They're not in fact law just yet, as with this IoT bill. If this does become law, and there's two parts here, and I'm not quite sure about this first part, but it says the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act will require NIST to issue standards and guidelines for secure development, patching, identity management, and configuration management for IoT products.
Followed by, all IoT devices acquired by the federal government will have to comply with these recommendations.
Is that two separate things or just for the federal government? That was my question.
So,
and I'm not quite sure.
And either way, I think the question or the answer is why not both? I mean,
why not both? Right?
It's a set of guidelines.
It's a starting point, right?
Well,
I think the intent is
it's a starting point.
Right intent.
5 years after they started talking about it.
So
agreed, Jeff. Yeah. Again, back to my first point of
it's a guideline.
Representative introduces the bill. It goes to there's committee and then actual voting on the bill.
And it's not conjunction junction, Larry. It's bill.
Right. So
hey, I'm a bill.
I'm just a bill up on Capitol Hill.
I'm only a bill.
So it's a set of guidance.
Yep.
That the federal government has to purchase products that abide by that.
I thought they already had that.
As a consumer, you can buy whatever the hell you want. It doesn't have to abide by these guidance. And the problem that I would find is that if they make this a law, then great. All of the IoT devices have to use this guidance. How are they going to enforce that worldwide?
Well, but that's the thing, because I think it's somewhat different from some of the things that FDA gets involved in, where the laws state it has to abide by these standards before you can bring the product to market. That's not clear. I'd have to actually go read the bill to see exactly what they're proposing. And it sounds like standards and guidelines are different from it has to meet this minimum level of standards, and there would have to be a standards body like the FDA if you want to put something on the market that's in the category of food and drugs, right? They not everything that goes to market, right? And tobacco is one thing, and especially cigars. In our other podcast that we talk about, right, that is under scrutiny, right? But they would say in the case of IoT, the question for me is, do I have to meet these standards to go to market, or is it kind of just like there are some guidelines that I should follow, but it's not a requirement to bring it to market? Those are two very different things.
And I think it's looking at it's not bring it to market. It's if I want to bring it to market and market it and have it be purchased by the federal government, U.S. federal government, then yes, I do.
Yeah, Jeff,
well,
please.
I was going to simplify what you were saying, Paul. It's the difference between should and shall.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. I wanted to comment and stupid idea. Early in the article, it talks about cybersecurity tech companies supporting the bill, and Tenable's mentioned. And I know this has been going on for years and years because Ron Gula, had me go down to the Hill. Mm-hmm. I don't even know what year. It was probably 2014 or 15, accompanying him going into, some legislative office to talk to a bunch of aides because they were starting to formulate this thing. So this says first introduced in 17. It took him a couple years to come up with the bill.
Yeah, I got you. So before.
But my question is, they list as the companies BSA, Mozilla, Rapid7, Cloudflare, CTIA, and Tenable. Mozilla is still a company?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely, still a company.
Wow. My stupid idea is, has anybody come up with a smart mask yet?
Yes.
I'm sure
well,
that's
define
out there.
smart.
Well, IoT.
Yeah. I mean, again, define what the end functionality is. Is it to monitor air quality, or is it intended to be one of those light up things you pair with your phone?
Time to replace the filter. Time to wash it.
Well, but what's interesting though, you talk about that. I have a particular brand of air filters in my house, largely for allergens and whatnot, right? That it has a sensor in it that monitors air quality, and you can see it. Like if I spray like cologne or body spray, in the bedroom, I can see the thing like it goes to red, it gets really angry, and it's trying to get. So like there is technology out there that definitely monitors air quality. Now that's in a device that is just size bigger than a laptop, smaller than a refrigerator kind of device. Conceivably, you probably could put that in a mask.
But so Jeff, to the air quality ones, I don't know of one, but I do know of one that has a bunch of LEDs in it, and you can pair it to your smartphone, so you can have it print messages and stuff on your mask. I'd say that's an IoT-based mask.
Sure,
but
possibly.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a difference between electronic and connected, I guess.
Well, I mean, it's connected to your phone over Bluetooth, so I'd say that's connected.
Yep.
With an app on a phone that's connected to the internet.
You can change the message with the app.
Yep.
Who's putting that out? When that somebody was promoting that on Twitter.
April.
It was April. Yeah, it was April. Yeah. I want to get one. We all want to get one. April.
I say Lee picks a story.
Yeah, Lee.
Well, I was thinking about Larry's number 3, my number something, and Paul's also all about the Bluetooth vulnerability there.
This is a new one. I think.
Well, it is.
It is. Okay.
It is.
Because we covered one last week, but this is yet a different one. This is from researchers at Purdue and another institution that I don't remember the name.
It was Purdue. So
there is another research body in this.
So this one was noted as Purdue. And the other one that we covered last week,
EPFL is the other organization. They spelled that. Yeah, there is.
Okay, so then it is the same. They are the same group then, because the one we just talked about last week, Blur, was EPFL.
Was in there as well with Purdue
and Purdue.
I think that's the confusion. It's the same. It sounds like the same research group. They found 2 different vulnerabilities.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you for that, by the way. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
So this new one is interesting.
BLESA.
I just got a connection request on Bluetooth from a device.
Is it my mouse?
No. Ironically enough, it's from my phone.
Interesting. I read this paper and I implemented it in Python, Larry. So
good. Yeah, no, I literally just got a Bluetooth
as we're talking
request
about
from my phone.
BLESA,
so we're talking about this.
Spoofing attacks against reconnections in Bluetooth Low Energy. And this is specific to low energy, whereas the one we talked about last week was both Bluetooth Classic and
yes, they needed to have both to make this happen, and that there was keys shared between both. This one is low energy, and it's a 2 type of pronged attack. To me, the first one made a lot of sense in that if you connected to a device and then someone came and spoofed the MAC address of that device, it would connect to that new device if you had moved out of range. Like, hey, I connect to a Wi-Fi network, and now I'm going to go over to the coffee shop, and there's a new network named here that the same one as my home. I'm going to connect to that. Same sort of methodology. Gotcha. And the big one there is that
that's still true in Wi-Fi today, right? They haven't fixed that.
No. It's gotten better. But so on this one, it was interesting for Bluetooth Low Energy in that there's some flaws in Bluetooth Low Energy that would allow that to happen. One, you could be pairing those devices together with no encryption. Then it's like, all bets are off. Everything's in plain text, no authentication and no encryption. Super easy. The other one, when authentication and encryption is used, is often in a mode known as just works, where it uses a default set of default pins of 6 0. Bless you.
Right. Thank you.
So like
I couldn't hit my mute button fast enough. Sorry.
That's simple. Like this makes sense. The other pronged attack was where authentication and encryption are used with the non-default pin of 6 zeros, typically known as bonding. They go through a mechanism says, we got to do this and we got to do that, and if one of those things isn't supported, they're supposed to disconnect if they can't find a quote common language. But with Android and Bluetooth and iOS stacks, if one of those two things doesn't work, they just go plain text.
Oh, interesting. Well, yeah, because I mean, it comes back to the debate of usability versus security, right? Like, you just want your phone to connect to stuff.
Yep.
You don't want that stupid security thing to get in the way.
Exactly, which apparently
it's like the architecture of early firewalls that would fail open.
Yep. Any. Also, like, I'm learning, like, all zeros is bad. Like, when you're doing any kind of authentication or any kind of crypto stuff, all zeros is bad.
Yeah, all low bits or all high bits are both bad.
Both bad.
Mm-hmm. No, there are some notable instances. There are some notable instances where all zeros are not bad. It really depends on the algorithmic situation.
NetLogin. Oh wait, no.
Oh wait, no. That's where it's bad.
Yeah,
that's bad.
Challenge, Jeff. Go ahead. Give me the exception.
Oh, come on! Don't ask me to do that. What about AES Cypher running in counter mode?
I'll take your word for it because you're Joff.
No, I think I'm right. I think that's valid.
All right, now a Tyler story. Tyler.
I mean,
he's like, wait, what? Am I here?
Oh wait, so hold on. I want Tyler. Number 3. Trump was wrong about TikTok. This is very pertinent to my interest because, as I was saying during the break, my oldest son has figured out how to bypass my protections and use TikTok. And
are you fucking kidding me?
I couldn't be more proud, to be quite honest. And rather than saying, like, you can't use TikTok because he's in 7th grade now, just starting 7th grade, and he's like, Dad, everyone else is using TikTok, and I'm like the odd man out if I don't. And I'm like,
that's the equivalent of Dad, I gotta have the Air Jordans,
right? Yes. Except he hacked to get his Air Jordans, and I'm like, dude, like, I much respect. Also, if you're going to continue to use TikTok, I'm like, I've read the announcement. Black Hills Information Security published a great article, reverse engineering the TikTok app. Tyler, you have an article about it. And my thing is, I'm like, here's the thing, dude. From what I've read so far, and I haven't read the BHS article in great detail yet, but from what I gather is that it's collecting information. So here's what I want you to do. That device you're using TikTok on, that you've hacked around it, which awesome, thumbs up. I don't want any other accounts on there, right? Like, let's minimize the number of accounts that are on there. You can use TikTok. You can be cool, communicate with your friends. I totally get that. Like, I was in 7th grade once too. I totally get that. And so, like, let's move forward. And he was totally cool with that. He's like, Dad, like, I cleaned up the iPad. I removed all my other accounts from it. Like, he was really good about it. And Tyler, your story kind of goes along with this kind of methodology, right?
See,
I mean, that's what we had been. We've discussed this several times on the show, right? Especially with TikTok and China in particular as an APT threat. And we've always said kind of one of the key takeaways is getting out of our Western mindset and thinking much longer term, much more grandiose. This is a long-term war. This is not a 50-year war. This is not even a 100-year war. Their ambitions are global takeover, and that could be within the next 200 years. So
is
they're
it global
planning
takeover or global market share?
That would be global takeover.
Hand in hand, Jeff. Hand in hand.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not a capitalist economy. They don't believe in it, and they think it's an inferior means of society. So at that point, that is a one or the other. So I mean, TikTok is I think just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other components to this. We look at silicon manufacturers. We look at hardware components that we're getting. We're looking at that long-term game. And anybody that was saying that we were all wearing our tinfoil hats even 2 or 3 years ago, like, this is a reality. We're starting to find some of those deep kind of long-term plans as well as means to do those. It's not just theory. It's not just a plan. They have well thought out and implemented structure to start to do this long-term game. So I think this will be a bigger conversation, and there's going to be much more, the small Western mindset of Congress saying, let's ban TikTok on military devices. Like, so short term, that's so minimalistic, that's so focused on the wrong problem. Like we're looking at a symptom rather than the disease and how to treat the disease with a long-term strategy. So it's a much bigger thing than just TikTok.
So speaking of long-term strategy, Paul, specifically for your household, may I suggest an alternate strategy? Give him an allowance and an OnlyFans account. He won't care about TikTok anymore.
Nah, just... We've had some of those discussions as well, and it's always the question of like, Dad, how do you find this stuff? I'm like, do you forget what Dad does for a living? Like, really?
Man, I've had that conversation
so many times. I pulled the all-auth authentication for the entire G Suite domain, right?
Yep.
For other reasons. And just going through the logs, I'm like, so, dude, like, what's this site that you authenticated to on, like, June 29th and stuff like that?
Yeah, where were you on the night of the 29th? And what were you doing with your OAuth?
He's like, how do you know this stuff? I'm like, that's not the question. It's not important right now.
Hey, so if you go back to the TikTok thing, though, if you do read the article that Derek did, and I actually previewed the article before.
Derek Banks, right?
Yeah, Derek Banks
is
posted
a BHS team member, awesome person, love Derek. He did a great job in the article. Yes.
Derek's he did. Look, Derek did really fine work on this. It was a great article, but the results are actually kind of inconclusive, right? It is one thing you can draw from the article, though, is that it is very, very noisy app in terms of its network communications, and it is very, very demanding app in terms of the amount of control that it exerts over your device. That should be enough in and of itself for you to think twice about using this app. But is there direct evidence and direct conclusions of that it's exfiltrating data out to specific Chinese-owned IP space or anything like that? There's none of those conclusions in the app, in the article. So you have to kind of draw your own conclusions. Me looking at it, I'm like, oh, hell no. And when I look at the article and I started talking about it with Derek, I'm like, yeah, I'm not using that app.
Right.
I'm just not.
Agreed. And largely that's what we decided, right? If we're going to use it, it's going to be a device that has minimal impact, right? No other accounts and all that kind of stuff, because it is noisy and chatty.
And if you look at the manifest itself of the app and the amount, just the pure amount of resource it's requesting of you in terms of control over your phone, that's a huge red flag,
right?
In my opinion, huge red flag.
Tyler, I want to go to your story number 8. I think from just a nerdy perspective and also a business perspective, I thought it was very interesting because I saw this as I was going through my articles too. Nvidia will buy ARM for $40 billion. It is the largest semiconductor deal ever, and I think a real testament to Nvidia that this is somewhat outside of security, and while we do use Nvidia technology for security purposes, cracking passwords being one of them, obviously, right? But also Nvidia to compete with the Sonys and the Microsofts of the world on the gaming platform, I think this is what justifies that 40. When you have to go to your shareholders and your board and say, all of us have had to justify budget at some point in time, whether that's to our bosses that could be our significant others or bosses in our careers and our day jobs, right? Got to justify that budget. Nvidia went to the board and said, we want to spend $40 billion and buy a company. And they're like, yes, go for it. So, I thought that was pretty cool.
So think back just a couple weeks ago, and I'm pretty sure this is public and has been in the works, but one of Apple's main strategies and goals has been to convert all of their platforms over to a single architecture, which is probably going to be ARM. And I think that's actually public knowledge. So this acquisition with all of iPhone, iPads, MacBooks, everything migrating into a single platform with ARM, I think this is almost a no-brainer. Like, that seems like a pretty reasonable number.
Yeah.
Well, you've also got to remember that a huge part of what's going on with NVIDIA is tied up in artificial intelligence as it pertains to real-time acquisition of data with respect to self-driving automobiles, right? I mean, NVIDIA are massively, massively partnered up and in bed with what Tesla's doing. And and so the ability for it to be able to sell technology to speed up any artificial intelligence processes as it pertains to real-time data acquisition and visualization of automation of driving is a big deal.
Well, that correlates over to military as well, military vehicles, and then that also correlates to the space stuff that's kind of in motion and in play, right? Like all that AI and the driving of those particular spaceships, whether that's on Mars or with inside of just a rocket coming there and back, like that's all kind of playing into that. And I think that's again a very smart move.
Yeah, no, they're playing it right. It's going to be continuing to be an interesting world. I wish I'd not sold my Tesla stock, by the way. Anybody who knew what happened.
Because it just split off.
Dude, I bailed out when they were about 300, and when before they split, they were like 1,700. It was some ridiculous number. Anyway.
Well, you're a dumbass.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, hold on. John's defense, stocks are not about like who has the best product, right? It's about a lot of other factors. We frequently talk here at Security Weekly what stocks we would invest in, and it's very different from what products we recommend that you should run in your enterprises. Like, let's be frank, right?
It's different set of requirements.
It is. It's a tough different game. Yeah. I want to talk about my story. Jeff, my story number 25. Most compliance.
I just want you to read the quote.
It was beautiful. But I agree with it, right? And it goes along with what I've been saying recently about PCI with Jeff, what you've been saying all along. And when I read this article, most compliance requirements are completely absurd. I'm like, the first thing you think is like, here's an article that's going to pick on PCI. Turns out it picks on like every other standard but PCI because they say, however, after they picked on ISO 27001, Sarbanes-Oxley, GLBA. They say, however, I think those who write requirements should take the payment card industry data security standard as an example. PCI DSS applies to all organizations that store cardholder data, blah, 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 blah. The way PCI DSS compliance is structured is a lot clearer than anything I've seen. It contains very little room for subjectivity, and you know exactly where you stand with it. I thought that was a great testament to PCI DSS.
It is, and yet it was well. I mean, Paul shared this article with me on Slack earlier. It's like, before you blow up, let me show you what they said about PCI. This is what they say about
PCI. Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's cool, and it is very cool, and it sort of underscores what I've been trying to say, since I was at Tenable, when they started having me look at other compliance requirements, because I'm a one-trick pony. I do PCI, and I'm like, oh, geez, the other compliance requirements, how do you do anything? They're either very vague, as this article pointed out, or when you get it more into the standards, like you start talking NIST, 800-whatever, and cybersecurity framework, risk management framework. The problem with those are they're like, here's everything that you could possibly need to know in terms of best practice benchmarks, and they leave it up to you to figure out what applies to you with no guidance, which they sort of touch on in this article, but they put it in the context of, GLBA, Sarbanes-Oxley, they just have these vague statements like, do security or have a security policy, and they don't give you any guidance. PCI, as it says, at least walks you through, you need to have this type of policy. You need to have this kind of standard. You need to have procedures. For the love of God, write down what you do. You're doing it, write it down so that somebody else can follow it. Formal procedures.
But it's a great point, Jeff.
PCI is pragmatic, is what you're saying. PCI is pragmatic. It's got application. It's got real meat to it. A lot of these other things, these ISO standards, they're very theoretical and abstract.
Right. Now, Josh, to your point, ISO 27001 says define a security policy. Sarbanes-Oxley says demonstrate due diligence. GLBA says develop a written information security plan. But in all of those, they don't say exactly how you do that, right? PCI is more, a lot more specific in those areas.
And PCI doesn't either, but PCI says have a standard, have a procedure, and based it on some industry recognized best practice.
Right.
You know that's where I disagree a little bit with. There's no with the little room for subjectivity. There's a lot of room for subjectivity depending on how you look at it. In terms of, I talked a little bit, during our virtual Hacker Summer Camp about the MITRE ATT&CK framework and what single requirement came up more than anything in terms of the mitigations. How do you protect or prevent against all these real world attacks that MITRE ATT&CK catalogs? It's have a damn configuration standard that's based on security best practices. It needs to, PCI says have it, and they say base it on an accepted industry standard. And they give examples like a CIS benchmark or something like that, but they give you the latitude. It's your business, it's your operation. Decide what is applicable to you, what matters, and then do the security things that you need to do based on what you need to do to conduct your business. That's the underpinning of what's there that nobody gets. And I've been thinking about this in the context of, I'm going to take a really mini soapbox moment. We have a lot of sponsors now. We talk very often about the latest. The latest new thing is prioritizing your risk, prioritizing vulnerabilities.
We're going to talk about that later on this year. With Vicarious, because I had a call with them today, and the next one with Vicarious we'll talk about prioritization. Yeah.
Well, and it's a great idea. It's a pragmatic idea. What occurred to me was, well, crap. The PCI standard in version 2, which was released in October of 2010, so nearly 10 years ago, they first introduced the idea of what we now call prioritization, because they had a requirement that says you should fix all your vulnerabilities, all your critical and high vulnerabilities based on a risk assessment that you determine what's important to you, which is essentially prioritization. What matters to you? What's going to impact you? Not all the gazillion vulnerabilities that are out there. Figure out what is applicable and pertains to you. And if it's a web-based exploitable vulnerability, but you're looking at a vulnerability scan report on a system that's 7 layers deep in your network, it might be okay not to patch that. Or at least not in the near term, or not within the 60, 90 days that PCI requires. And nobody, I picked up on that when I was doing, a QSA. I would tell my customers, you have the opportunity here to not have to jump through hoops to fix all the vulnerabilities that your internal scan report's finding. Why don't you take advantage of the opportunity of coming up with a risk and a risk score for vulnerabilities based on your environment? And they're like, duh, what? Don't I just patch
with the scan report? Patch everything, right?
So, I mean, my and not to pick on any company that's trying to capitalize on this idea of prioritization, because I think it's appropriate. Starting with Tenable, because I think they might have been first. Let's prioritize. We've done everything we can to find all the vulnerabilities, and we've overwhelmed you. And there's no way you can possibly fix all these, real, legitimate or esoteric, cryptographically hypothetical vulnerabilities. But they're all scored the same, and you have to fix them according to certain standards like PCI. It was the first question I had for Tenable when they came out with that. It's like, are you letting the customers customize and tailor what constitutes critical, high, or medium? Because that's what PCI calls for, and PCI is a good chunk of the industry that keeps you in business. So you should probably try to tailor your solutions to try to accommodate a PCI audience. I'll shut up.
No, you know
great,
what?
No, great point, Jeff.
I think on that note, we probably should consider wrapping it up. But I want to make one comment on Jeff's, because I love making comments about Jeff's PCI love, and that is PCI can be too prescriptive, and one of the challenges is PCI has to continually update itself because it's pragmatic and prescriptive. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Who knows? I actually kind of lean towards it being a good thing because pragmatic, prescriptive, and current is probably an excellent way to be in terms of usability.
Yeah, no, agreed, Jeff. Just a couple more stories before we end this show. There was an MFA bypass in Microsoft 365. This was discovered by Proofpoint, disclosed in their internal security conference. Not much details. I do have a link to the article in the show notes. It has to do with WS Trust and some other open standards in ways to abuse that. We don't have full details on that yet because, again, it was an internal conference. And when I read this article, I was like, not enough detail yet to really...
Spoofing IPs and user agents and headers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a thing.
I want to. I think we'll cover that on future shows, Tyler. To your point, right? As we learn more details, along those lines and more details, Microsoft has announced their Project One Fuzz framework as an open source developer tool to find and fix bugs at scale. They have not actually released a tool September 18th or something like that, or maybe even today on the 17th. It was like they just haven't released it yet. So there's like a GitHub repository that has some documentation, but no actual code to be released because the presentation has not quite happened yet. They're presenting at like a C++ developer conference is where they're announcing that. So we'll cover that on future shows. I did want to mention we did an interview with, I know, right? I wanted to cover it on this show, believe me. I wanted to actually test it and cover it, but not yet. Things that you can do now. We did a great interview with Jimmy Mester from Signal Sciences, and I said, hey, how do we learn about Kubernetes container and cloud security? He had two great recommendations, one of which I looked into in a little detail and actually did a little bit of the CTF. It's called flaws.cloud. So if you go to flaws.cloud, there's Tyler, you're nodding your head. You've done this one, right? They provide hints. Great little CTF. In CTFs,
it's amazing.
Right? They've done a great job with it. So it lets you sharpen your cloud hacking skills. Also, Kubernetes Goat is another one, and I linked to the GitHub repository there. I thought that was really, really good in terms of being able to sharpen your skills. Also, in the news that we didn't cover, there was something else. APTs on Linux, which is another thing that just keeps coming up. Kaspersky, I think, just promotes the same article. Like Linux users beware, you could be facing more cyber threats and APTs on Linux. I think that's just something that I'm not sure what's going on there, but I see like the same kind of theme of articles coming up. Suspicious endpoint containment.
And over and come on, Paul, let's go.
Hey, I'm still going. Wait, suspicious endpoint containment with OSSec was a blog from the Internet Storm Center at SANS. Make sure hitting my mute button.
So we just
Windows command line script that temporarily enables the Windows firewall. My story number 11. Make sure you check that out. And
make sure you check out 1 through 85 stories. Tribe of Hackers Blue Team is now out. I think next week we need to pick up Larry's story number 2, where Snowden is vindicated. We need to spend some time on that next week.
And Paul, see, you got half your work done for next week already. You got a whole bunch of stories left.
When we'll just recycle them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Over and...
Larry, take us out.
Over and out.